Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started. This story begins where the princess of the northern clan and her retinue sat. A maid approached her and turned to the princess and said that they would be entering the Dusky Emperor's territory very soon. But at that moment, some strange sounds came from the princess. She was trying to say something, but she was unable to do so. Then the maid, smiling, looked at her and said that she had completely forgotten one very important thing. And what she forgot was that the princess had been misbehaving the whole way, in her opinion, and was clearly intent on running away, which was why New Pai wanted to show her what suffering tasted like. The girl tried to resist. Then the maid suddenly came to her and said that she could free her, but she should not do anything stupid and everything would be all right. The girl had to agree to this condition after all, and soon she was completely unleashed. Her name was Su Lily, and she had just graduated from high school. And in order to keep her from sitting at home all day on vacation, her father sent her outside for a walk, and during the walk, she fell into the lake quite by accident. She woke up already as the unwanted second princess of the northern clan, who, instead of the much-loved third youngest princess, is being forced hard to marry the dreaded Dusky Emperor. Some say in that world that this emperor is a rather fierce and cruel man. People say that this emperor is a fierce and cruel man. His whole body is covered with pus growths, and instead of arms and legs he has tentacles. He is a kind of mutant monster, the disgusting sight of which can deprive even of sight for a few days. And now the girl has concluded for herself that the people close to her are simply sacrificing her. Then the maid suddenly turned to her and told the second princess to sit normally and not fidget. However, Su Lily found it very hard to do so, as she was incredibly hungry because she hadn't eaten anything for a whole 24 hours already. But the maid, pulling out her sword, told her to also play the role of the third princess well, for otherwise she would definitely not spare her. The girl of course agreed and continued to sit upright, while she thought about the fact that this world she had fallen into was just awful, and she wanted incredibly badly to go back to her place on Earth. Some time passed from then on, and they arrived at the city gate of the Dusky clan. Even though Su Lily tried to escape, she was still caught and put back into the carriage. The world she had entered was the world of cultivators. The people accompanying her were all the most outstanding cultivators of the clan. The girl couldn't believe how this was even possible. But as for her, aside from the fact that she didn't possess any practices, her body was completely unsuitable to be able to cultivate. So it's no wonder that the so-called Father Emperor didn't hesitate to send her to the wedding, instead of the third princess who has great potential. As soon as Su Lily looked around, she saw that there were quite a few soldiers, and she didn't know if she was going to the wedding in general, or the war. By then they had all stopped, and the servants approached one of the guards. The girl was swearing a lot, saying that their Dust clan was inconsiderate. Aji's palace guard said that it was such an order from the emperor. Only the princess could enter the city, and the rest had to leave. Then another servant girl objected, and said that they were the elite of the northern clan, who were accompanying the princess. The partner agreed, and said that they should meet with the Dusky Emperor, because no one knew that the appendage barbarians of the Dusky clan were so wild. Su Lily at this moment thought that they were doing the right thing. After all, this ignorant family was the only thing to do. They should go home soon. But at that moment, the guard suddenly couldn't stand it any longer. He drew his sword and slashed the girl's body, saying that it was the emperor's order and they had to obey. All the people present were very frightened and couldn't believe that he had actually brutally murdered the maid like that. But the man didn't care. He said that only the princess could enter, and that only death awaited trespassers. He kept shouting, telling them to leave as soon as possible or payback would not wait long. Su Lily was still sitting there very surprised and couldn't believe that he had really just killed her. And now she didn't want to go there even more. But at that moment, the maid stepped back and said that was the end of it. The princess should only do what they said and not get into trouble. However, at that moment, an extraneous voice was heard. He said that there was absolutely no need for that. All the servants immediately looked around to see where the strange voice was coming from. And when they looked up, they saw that there was some silhouette in the sky. A blonde-haired man who said that the city of the Dust clan was inaccessible to outsiders. Then Gu Huai's mentor, who had been running fast all this time, suddenly appeared. He turned to His Majesty and asked if they hadn't agreed that he would wait quietly in the palace. The guards who were standing outside immediately began to address His Majesty the Dusky Emperor and bow in greeting and respect. Su Lily, for her part, when she saw him, she couldn't believe that it was really that emperor, for she thought that it must be a person who looked like some kind of humanoid with green tentacles. But at that moment, the guards began to raise their hands up and say that the Dusky Emperor was the best. They kept shouting all the time, thus welcoming him and rejoicing at his presence. But at that moment, the man suddenly put his finger to his mouth and told them to be quiet. Everyone immediately stopped talking. Then he turned toward the girl and inquired if the third princess of the northern clan was in the stalls. Su Lily immediately felt some kind of oppressive aura and realized that it was indeed the Dusky Emperor. She also thought that this guy was quite handsome and assumed that he was a shape-shifting monster and only took the form of a beast on certain occasions. The man looked at the maids and told them to go back and tell them that His Majesty the Dusky Emperor wished to see the true third princess of the northern clan. The girls already wanted to object something, however he just killed them in that second and said that they were in his way. Blood spread everywhere, and from it, beautiful red-colored flowers suddenly began to bloom. The maids, when they saw this sight, they thought that this skill was simply terrible, yet it was considered one of the best cultivators in the world. Su Lily, for her part, was sitting in her tent and trembling with fear. She realized that this was a warning. The girl, for her part, assumed that if he really found out that she wasn't the third princess, in that case, he would probably just kill her like everyone else. But at this moment, this emperor, still sitting in the air, turned to the girl in the palanquin and inquired whether she was the third princess or a fake after all. The girl, for her part, continued to sit in her tent and did not answer him. He waited for a while, and then asked her if she was going to remain silent. Su Lily was just in a panic. She didn't know what to do. Should she lie to him about being the third princess? But the girl realized that the third princess was just a self-cultivating genius, and there wasn't a drop of spiritual power in her case, and once the marriage ceremony took place, the deception would immediately be exposed. This worthless emperor is just playing with her, and he doesn't really care about her life or death. The girl couldn't believe that she was going to die in this place, but she thought about the fact that she couldn't just give up like that, and decided that if she was going to die anyway, she should at least do it with pride. So the girl turned to the surviving maidservants, requesting that they go and report to His Majesty the Emperor that she was indeed not the third princess. She also asked them to say that she was the second princess of the northern clan. When the maids heard this, they thought that she had completely lost her mind. However, Su Lily at this moment raised her voice very much and started shouting, saying that she was the one who had decided to come to this place as a bride instead of her sister. And there's no way she's ever going to let her little sister marry him, and it's all because of her, because she's incredibly attracted to the man. The girl said he was the light of her life, and the kind of husband one could only dream of. Su Lily, still screaming, said that she felt incredibly sick just at the thought of his noble body being defiled by other women, and she can't think about the fact that he might have children with other women. Because of this, she often can't sleep. The girl said she just couldn't help herself and upset their wedding. It's because she's only thinking about him all the time. As soon as Su Lily finished this sentence, there was complete silence all around. No one even dared to say a word. The girl, however, continued to sit in her tent and began to get very worried, not understanding why there was such silence around, and assumed that she had said something wrong, and also thought that he would be incredibly angry and would definitely kill her for it. For a while the emperor was still silent, and then he said that if it was true, he was very curious. He went downstairs and, opening the tent, said that in that case he must see the man he liked so much. At this moment, the girl thought that she must have really succeeded, and if she tried hard enough, she could really survive. So she smiled and turned to His Majesty in surprise, asking if it was really him. But at that moment he suddenly felt very bad, because behind the girl appeared some other silhouette, which was so bright that it just blinded him. The emperor immediately grabbed his head and was ready to scream from the pain that arose in his body. Su Lily, for her part, was surprised. She didn't understand what had happened and why he had started acting strange so suddenly. However, once she took a closer look, she saw that something had begun to happen to his body, as if something was being evicted from it. The girl thought about the fact that he must be in a lot of pain, but at that moment, he grabbed her neck in a strangling motion, and then said in a quiet and bass voice that no one would ever think that someone like her could put a curse on him, and asked that she speak immediately about who she was, and also who had sent her in the first place. The girl was starting to choke. She couldn't breathe at all, so through her coughing she asked him to take his hand away. But he would not obey her. Then her neck suddenly began to glow brightly, and everything around her erupted in bright flames. The girl somehow created a huge wind that threw even some of the maids aside. The guards stood staring in surprise, not understanding what this was even about. But soon that light subsided a little, and the wind began to dissipate. The girl, for her part, sat coughing because the man was not giving her air. When oxygen began to flow into her lungs, Sulily was glad that she had been saved. If it weren't for the strange light that formed around her, she would have suffocated for sure. But at that moment he suddenly touched her face with his hand. The girl didn't understand why he was doing that and assumed that he was just mad. However, the emperor turned her neck side to side and saw that some sort of flower had formed there, and around it, the black enchantments that had just recently been there began to dissipate. The man was silent for a while, and then asked in surprise if it was really a divine blood mark. Sulily, for her part, was still trying to get her breathing back to normal. But at this moment, she suddenly saw his hand reaching for her, and he grew closer, wondering if people were really willing to give such a valuable gift. The girl didn't understand what he was talking about, because she thought that the second princess was just spoiled goods. He in turn put his head on her chest and told her to be silent. Sulily was so surprised that she didn't understand what was even going on or what he wanted to do. She couldn't answer a single word. But then suddenly the emperor inquired. Hadn't she just said that she liked this emperor so much that she couldn't even sleep at night? That's why this emperor she's so in love with simply can't afford to cheat the princess's feeling. The girl was blushing at this point. She realized that it was all just wrong, because the emperor hates people more than anything else in the world, and he should have been touched, and then let her just go home. He in turn, still smiling, turned to the guards and told them to have someone escort the princess into the palace and take her to his chambers. Sulily was very indignant, for she had not meant it at all and wanted him to let her explain herself so that there would be no more such misunderstandings. However, it was too late. The girl was brought to the center of the Dusk clan, namely to the palace. But to her greatest good fortune, the palace was attacked by assassins, and she was able to escape safely from there. To begin with, the girl decided to find for herself the clothes of a palace servant, and after that to look for a way out. She had to get herself together to ensure that she would definitely not be married off to that strange, dusky emperor. But she was still very hungry, and that was still a pretty big problem for her. At that moment, Sulily suddenly heard shouts that told them to look around the area she was in. So she decided to start by hiding in the house so that no one would find her so quickly. As soon as she closed the door behind her, she exhaled with relief and looked around, not understanding why there were so many colors around. But then she took a closer look and saw that it was the many corpses from which the flowers had grown. The girl was so frightened and surprised at the same time that she couldn't even move. But at that moment she suddenly heard a voice coming from the closed door. She immediately realized that the best solution was to pretend to be dead too, so that she wouldn't be found so quickly. And then the emperor's aide suddenly ran into the study, addressing his lordship, asking if he was all right. But at the same second a single blow flew at him that could have killed him, and the guy immediately introduced himself, saying it was him, his assistant. Sulily was still lying on the floor and couldn't believe what was even happening. She was even beginning to wonder what it was that had just flown through. But at that moment, she suddenly realized his aide's words about addressing His Highness, and concluded that there was someone else in the room, and she just hadn't noticed it. And looking more closely, she saw a silhouette of a man standing nearby. The girl could not believe that it was really the emperor standing there. The dusky emperor turned to Guhai in his turn, and said that since it was him, he apologized, for he thought it was one of the assassins. However, he also said while smiling that his senior mentor had already succeeded. He didn't expect that the parry could dodge such a strong strike. Sulily in turn continued to lie there pretending to be dead, and thought about how this was just a failure and she had delivered herself to his doorstep. Gu Hui began to slowly walk through the corpse and turned to His Majesty and asked that he no longer mock the despicable servant. Afterward, the man also said that something had been cleared up about those mysterious people. He said that the marriage of the second princess had been planned by the third princess under the tacit consent of the emperor and inquired what to do with the girl now. The emperor thought for a while, and then said that if she was obedient, it would be better not to touch her. And if she tried to escape, he would make her into fertilizer for flowers. As soon as Su Lily heard this, she was ready to just scream from the surprise of such a decision, but she held back. Then the aide wondered if the emperor wasn't joking. After all, she was an ordinary person who had no spiritual power and definitely couldn't escape. When he said that her escort had already been conducted beyond their borders, the girl, who continued to lie motionless, thought it was over. But what she didn't want most of all was to become fertilizer for the flowers. They were silent for a while. Then the emperor's aide turned to him and asked why he had to do everything by himself and let out such a murderous aura, because the palace guards could have dealt with the assassins. The man, upon reflection, said it was not necessary, for their lives he had to take personally. Gu Hui did not argue with him. Then he offered to escort His Majesty to the restroom to rest. The man also did not object, and they left shortly afterward. When the girl noticed this, she was very happy. She got to her feet and thought that luckily, no one had found her after all. She needed to get out of there as soon as possible, before someone else came to the place. Except she didn't know which way they'd gone, and she had to find a place to change. Su Lily was so engrossed in her thoughts that she didn't even notice someone approaching her from behind. This person was silent for a while, and then turned to the second princess, asking what she was doing here, and also asked if she was bored being alone in the marriage chamber. The girl screamed in surprise. She recognized the emperor at once, and couldn't believe that he hadn't left. She had to get out of it, so she said that she had been looking for him everywhere. The emperor was quite close to her and said that he hadn't expected the princess to be so spunky and proactive. Then he picked her up in his arms. The girl was so frightened that she even began to stutter. She wanted to ask him to put her down on the ground, but the man told her to calm down and be quiet. He started to bring her somewhere to the side closer to the couch that was standing nearby. Su Lily was very excited and didn't know what he wanted to do, but she knew she couldn't do it. Then he put the girl on the bed and said Gu had heard that people really like red flowers, especially when they are in the room for one nuptials. You should also take care of the red silks to make everything look festive. They sat and looked at all these corpses and walls stained with blood. The emperor asked if he had stained all these rooms beautifully enough with the blood of his enemies. He also asked if it looked festive and if the second princess liked this coloring of the chambers. The girl was just horrified and thought that he was the most real abnormal and crazy. The emperor suddenly grabbed her neck again, but it was a light movement. She realized that if she answered wrong, he would just break her neck. Su Lily knew very well that she couldn't let this happen, so she had to quickly pull herself together and come up with such a plausible story. She remained silent for a while longer, then smiled and told His Highness that he was incredibly kind to her, and she was very happy. He put his palm on her shoulder then, smiled and said that if she liked everything, it was okay. Su Lily was very surprised to hear this, for she had not thought it would be so simple. He pointed to the side and said that he would show her something else that she would like. The girl immediately followed his gaze and saw many different roots start to grow out of one of the corpses and wrap around it. The man flew upwards, and that was when the girl realized that he wasn't dead yet. The emperor explained to Su Lily that he had purposely left one of the assassins alive for entertainment. The assassin continued to scream, demanding his death, and the emperor explained to Su Lily that this technique is called Beyond the Edge, one of his favorites. Under its effect, a person is in absolute consciousness, unable to lie. He feels the pain of every vine sprout penetrating his body, and realizes how slowly he is dying, with no chance of fainting. The most important thing about this technique is that a person cannot lie while under its influence. The emperor explained to the girl that he would now say absolutely anything he was asked. He asked the boy if he had an accomplice. The killer, still feeling unbearable pain, replied that he had an accomplice. The one through shouts replied that his accomplice was Her Highness, second Princess Su Lily. She was very surprised to hear this. She couldn't believe she was an accomplice to a murderer. How could this have happened? She hadn't inherited that man's memories. The Emperor, hearing this information, thought about it and looked at her with a smile. Su Lily was ready to scream with anger and fear, realizing that she was probably going to die today. The assassin stated that this plot was their plan, coordinated with those people. They said they would send a second princess to replace her sister. They were the ones who hired them for the assassination this evening. These people said that when the Dusky Emperor met the second princess, his life force would be undermined, and the demonic blood would take over. This will give the assassins the opportunity to kill, or at least severely wound the Dusky Emperor. When Su Lily heard all this information, she was shocked. She thought that this place was dark, gloomy, and mysterious. However, it was still hard for her to believe that there was really something hidden in her body. But if one thought carefully, when the Dusky Emperor approached her, he really did seem to be distraught. And that had its own logic. They were silent for a while. And then the Dusky Emperor remarked that this was all very interesting. And it turns out that the second princess is the center of the conspiracy. Then he asked what was so special about her and the other princess. The man replied that she was actually the center of the plan, a secret weapon created by these people. He said nothing specific at all, for he was simply being a mortal who was not supposed to know such information. Su Lily sat very surprised and couldn't believe that the second princess was really a secret weapon against the Emperor. This meant that this was her end. If she tries to explain that she's not from this world and doesn't know anything, she simply won't be believed. Her journey was simply horrible. A servant had bullied her along the way, wouldn't let her eat, and with such difficulty she had escaped from the chambers, but still she would end up being fertilizer for the flowers. But then she thought about it and realized that something was wrong. She plucked up courage and spoke. Su Lily asked in a trembling voice what they would do to the second princess if their plan succeeded. The man replied that if the plan succeeded, the second princess would be killed by the mad emperor. And if she was lucky and didn't die, the third princess's decree was to take advantage of the commotion and kill her. The girl was very surprised to hear this. She couldn't believe that they were playing all these strange games. Besides, if the second princess was really such a secret weapon, why was the servant treating her so badly? She was just left like a victim, but the girl decided she still had a chance. Suddenly she cried and turned to the emperor. Su Lily said that it was too much, and added that they really are as cruel and unfeeling as they are. She doesn't understand how anyone could take advantage of her love for the Dusky Emperor and hurt such a beautiful and holy person like His Majesty. When the man who was sitting next to her heard all these words, he was very surprised, and she, in her turn, continued to play the part. The girl waved her handkerchief and did not understand why her sister, father and mother had decided to do this to her lover. Why the whole world was preventing her love for the Dusky Emperor from flourishing. She cried even more and said that her unhappy love was apparently doomed to failure. When she turned to look at the Emperor's reaction, she saw the look of surprise and shock on his face. And then, overjoyed, she thought that it must have worked after all. Su Lily then remembered that even after so many years of suffering and hardship, fate had finally brought her to this place, and their meeting was destined by fate. Then she spread her arms forward to embrace him, and told the Emperor that as long as she could see his beautiful face and inhale the intoxicating scent of his body, her soul would be in bliss. She fell on her knees and addressed the Emperor, also calling him God who had come down from heaven. He was, in her opinion, the very embodiment of beauty and a true wonder of the world. Under His Majesty, it is as if all nature blossoms, his beard is like the thorns of those beautiful flowers, and his feet are sacred roots. She called His Majesty the Emperor, the juiciest honeyed peach that stirred her heart. When she saw his even more frightened face, she thought to herself that he was clearly not ready for this yet, but she wanted to see how quickly she would make him disgusted. The girl said that she wanted to fall into his arms and ride on his nose. Then the girl thought that it was really a little too much, because she was starting to feel nauseous from those words. So she decided to calm down a little and change the subject, saying that this wedding night was bound to end very well. The girl thought that confidence would be the key to her victory. However, the man at that moment took a rag that was lying nearby and covered the girl with it, so that she would shut up at last. Su Lily was very happy when she saw this, because he gave the reaction that he didn't like it. Also, his eyes got so small it was like he saw a bunch of rotten flatbread that had been pulled out of the toilet. The girl wanted to say something else, but he asked her to shut her mouth and stop talking nonsense. And she repeated over and over again that she really loved him incredibly much. And at that moment she was thinking that she had to throw it away, and she would not miss this opportunity to escape. But at that moment, he picked it up and then threw it to the ground like an unnecessary thing. Su Lily didn't understand what had happened. They hadn't even left the palace yet, and he'd already thrown her face down on the floor. However, at this moment he suddenly grabbed his head again and felt rather strange. When the girl paid attention to it, she realized that something was wrong with him. He fell to the ground at this point and held his head hard. It seemed like he was about to scream, and the girl hoped very much that he would not go mad again. She decided that she had to run away, and if she didn't do it now, it would be the end of her. Her feet, however, had a completely different plan. They weren't going to go anywhere. They were just standing still. The Emperor, for his part, had already risen and was looking at her with a completely blank stare. Then she turned to him and asked him to stay back. But the man at that moment suddenly fell straight into her arms. He was so heavy that it was hard for her to sit up. The girl wondered what had happened to him. She hoped he wasn't dead. When she felt that he was still breathing, she exhaled with relief and thought that he had just lost consciousness. She felt sorry for it, of course. After all, if he had died, she would have been able to run away in peace. But then she thought, so what about the fact that it was completely wrong? After all, he should not have fainted on her. Apparently, he had absolutely no idea how fragile a girl she was in general, and clearly would not be able to withstand someone like him. Su Lily, after taking a closer look at him, also noticed that this guy had a pretty good and clean skin, as well as long eyelashes. He was sleeping so sweetly, though unconscious. She would have loved to rest for a while too, but the girl realized she couldn't relax. Then she thought about the fact that he was really quite handsome and realized that she was slowly starting to go crazy. Because she was just crazy about this psychopath, she needed to get away as soon as possible before he woke up and rushed around looking for her. But the moment she tried to get up, she couldn't because the man held onto her arms very tightly and wouldn't let go. It was like a dead grip. But at that moment his body, because it was too relaxed, then rolled onto its other side, and she was right there on his chest. Their faces were quite close, and if just one more centimeter, their lips would just touch. She immediately reacted in time and moved away from him, realizing that just a little more and there would have been a real disaster. Su Lily was about to go again, but suddenly she noticed that he was still holding her hand. She turned to him, asking if he could let go at last. She realized he was unconscious and probably couldn't hear her. The princess didn't understand how he even had so much strength, since he had fainted, and when people are unconscious, they're completely exhausted. She even tried to free her hand with a lot of effort. At that moment, his aide suddenly came in, who turned to His Majesty and asked why he had returned without even paying attention to him. Gu Huai saw this whole picture when he looked forward and was very surprised. He didn't even know what she was going to say, so he just stared at the girl directly in her eyes for a while. She herself did not understand why he had come suddenly, for it really could be completely misunderstood if one came in like this from the outside. He walked quickly out the door, closing it behind him, apologizing for the disturbance. He stood there for a while longer, and then he suddenly rethought the whole situation. So the aide ran back in. He addressed His Majesty sympathetically and inquired whether he was safe at all. Then he turned to Aji and told him to kill the second princess in defense of His Majesty. Then one of the warriors immediately ran into the room. He started pouncing on the girl with his sword, asking how she even dared to harm his emperor, and also said he would kill her for it. Su Lily, when she saw this, was very surprised. She quickly grabbed the emperor's chest and pulled him to her like a shield. She said that it was all unfair because she had not harmed His Majesty in any way. When Aji saw this, he suddenly stopped and asked in a trembling voice how she even dared to touch His Majesty's body. He was just furious and told her to get her filthy, murderous hands off him. The girl, in turn, continuing to cover herself with the emperor, replied that of course she wouldn't do that. for she was not an idiot at all. The warrior got even more angry when he saw that she even hugged him and told her to quickly move away from him and not come near him again. The princess in turn replied that His Majesty had suddenly lost consciousness and she had absolutely no idea what had happened. Before he did so, he had held her hand and wouldn't let go, so she simply had no choice. The warrior called her a wretch and asked how she dared to hold His Majesty's hand at all. He called her a despicable and filthy human brat, not understanding how she dared to defile their noblest and holiest lord. The girl, continuing to cover herself with his patronymic, asked him to listen to her already at last, and the emperor's aide tried to stop Aji, but it was no use. He was going to tear her to pieces. Soon the assistant took matters into his own hands after all. He pulled Aji back and told him to stay just beside him. He also told him that His Majesty's situation was completely unclear right now, so he had better not act rashly, for no one knew how it might end. Then he turned to the second princess and told her to put His Majesty on the ground, for he promised that he would not hurt her. She did so at once, for she believed his assistant. Gu Huai slowly approached the emperor and asked when His Majesty had fallen into a coma. The girl, hesitating at first, said it was about 10 minutes ago, but then changed her mind and said it was about a quarter of an hour ago. Sama caught a glimpse of the man called Aji. She realized that he guarded the city gates and killed people if they disagreed with him. She also thought about the fact that if anything happened to Yi Qiyuan, her life would be over, even though it wasn't even her fault for anything. The aide continued to examine the emperor's body. Then the girl turned to him and asked him if everything was all right. Gu Huai examined the body for a while more. Then he said that it was all rather strange, because His Majesty must have fallen asleep, because all his vitals were perfectly fine. The girl who heard this was very surprised like everyone else, and looked at the body of the emperor, who was lying quietly and breathing as if he was truly asleep. Aji in turn came closer to them and asked if he had really just fallen asleep. The assistant replied that, judging by his pulse, he had. Gu Huai thought at this moment that the originally irritable evil spirit in his affairs had actually calmed down. His Majesty had just killed so many people, and the evil spirit was surely quite difficult to suppress. And besides, the old injuries that were present on his body had completely healed online. So he wondered what the origin of this second princess was, and what influence she had on the emperor. However, since His Majesty is in perfectly good health perhaps for the moment, she can be considered innocent. Then suddenly Aji spoke up and said that since His Majesty's body was temporarily safe, he suggested that this girl's hand be cut off. Su Lily was very surprised when she heard about it. And then, looking at him in surprise, she asked him why he wanted to do it at all, since she, as it turned out, was completely innocent of anything. But the man in turn explained his position by saying that His Majesty was very tired of her hand, so it was necessary to cut it off, since she can't just put it away. The aide, hearing this suggestion, thought for a moment. Then he agreed with the warrior, saying that it had its own logic. After all, if they cut off her arm, His Majesty would be able to lie down more comfortably. The girl then shouted even louder and suggested not to worry to begin with. After all, they could think of other more effective ways. However, Aji was not going to negotiate with her for long and raised his weapon up. The girl was afraid that her arm would be cut off, and said that she was going to revolt. And the girl also added that it was quite a surprise to her that they were willing to give to His Imperial Majesty and secretly commit such a horrible act. The man, when he heard these words, immediately stopped and looked at her and the assistant in surprise, and asked what she was even saying. Su Lily looked quite serious, and with a hand on her chest, she said that he knew who she was. She is a girl who is determined to devote herself head over heels to his great emperor. And since he left it in this place, that means it is his property, and only the emperor can make such decisions about it. She also said that if they did so, they would dispose of His Majesty's property without his own consent. And this is insolence, moreover. It could even be considered treason. The man, when he heard those words, really thought about it and realized that she was probably telling the truth. So there was perfect silence in the room. The girl was downright proud of herself at this point, because she realized that talking nonsense was enough to stun them and make them think. And after a while, she calmly said that they had no right to do anything to her until His Majesty woke up. Otherwise, she'd start a riot. Sulili looked at them and thought that they could be sure of that. The most important thing for her at that moment was to confuse their plans, and in order to realize it, His Majesty the Emperor must not wake up unexpectedly. They talked about it for some time, and after they had talked it over, Aji said that he apologized. After all, they were going to do something reckless. Guhuai agreed with him and said that he was asking the princess to wait until His Majesty woke up, and then he would make a decision on his own. He also said that there was too much blood around and they shouldn't stay in this place, so he suggested that the princess go with them to the other chambers. The girl, when she heard this, became very excited, thinking that she would finally be able to escape. She certainly thought so. However, her plans didn't come to fruition, unfortunately. As soon as they moved to the other room, they were placed next to the Emperor on the bed, and she had absolutely no idea what was even going on. Guhuai explained that while the Emperor was sleeping, he and Aji would be watching her together. She could be sure of that. He also asked the girl to wait quietly for His Majesty to wake up and finally make his decision. Smiling, he pointed to his knives and said that she had better not make any unnecessary movements, for if she did, she might get very badly hurt herself. The girl, when she heard this, immediately realized that they weren't even hiding their threat, so she closed her eyes and pretended to sleep, and thought to herself that he was very wrong about her trying to escape. It was actually quite difficult for her to fall asleep in such a tense situation. She was also incredibly hungry as she hadn't eaten in over 24 hours. She wanted to eat a variety of meats, a big juicy burger, pineapple buns, and lots of other things. And so, while the princess pondered and imagined all this, she finally did fall asleep. Sulili slept so soundly that she soon didn't even notice that her hand was finally released by the Emperor. The man just stared at her for a while. Then he took her by the throat and began to choke her. She woke up immediately, gasping, and started coughing. The girl assumed that it was just a realistic dream in which she had simply held her breath. As she looked around, she realized it was already morning, and she still couldn't believe that she had actually had this nightmare. Then she turned her attention to the other side of the bed, and noticed that Emperor Yuan had already woken up and left. At that moment, the maids came into her room and were glad that Her Highness was already awake. Then the girls came closer to her, and one of them, bowing, said that her maids had been expecting her for a long time. Sulili looked at her in surprise and wondered who they even were. The girl then smiled and said that her name was Chuxia, and she was a first-class maid from Yuning Palace. She also explained that she had been ordered to come to this place to serve the princess. When the girl heard this, she was so surprised that a shiver even ran down her skin. At this time, the Emperor met with his aides in the bathroom and asked if she had really said that she was willing to devote herself from head to toe, giving everything. They bowed, and the aide replied that that was absolutely correct. That was exactly what she had told them. He said thoughtfully, if she was so determined, she really could have said that after all, those with heavenly Tao blood flowing in them should be different from ordinary people. However, this usually applied to anomalies such as talent for refinement and luck. She was different from ordinary people, and it was only natural that Guhuai had never heard of such people, so he didn't know what decision to make in such a situation. When the man inquired as to the progress of the investigation about the second princess, he replied that a spy had sent a new message. Guhuai picked up the paper and replied that it was just information about her, very suspicious. Turning to His Majesty, he said that just the day before yesterday, he had clearly seen the imprint of heavenly blood on the neck of the second princess. However, before that, she had no signs of heavenly Tao lineage. Biologically, the second princess was originally a servant, and her status was quite low. The second princess was born a mortal who was incapable of perfection and was rejected by the monarch from childhood. She had a gloomy and grumpy temper. The girl often tormented and scolded her subordinates and constantly changed servants and attendants. She had an extreme disgust and hatred for other races. One day, she even managed to torture a slave of the Dark Moon to death. The man turned to His Majesty and said that he felt that everything was not as simple as it might seem at first glance. The Emperor started to get out of the bath and said that the human race is two-faced and three-faced, and these are nothing more than a few common tricks. He explained that she was but a short-lived prisoner, and he was very tired of playing with her. So he ordered her restraints to be loosened and sent a man to watch her for these 3 days to find out her true purpose. Also, Emperor Yuan said that if they ended up finding out nothing after this time, he wanted them to just kill her. At this time, the servants tried to take care of the princess and told her to let them wash and change her clothes. The girl kept saying that she could do it herself, but the servants explained that it was unacceptable, and before long, she didn't have the strength to resist against several people, and they dunked her in the bathtub after all. Su Lily then shouted loudly and asked, "Did they really put ice in the water? You see, she was quite cold." The servants in turn dunked her head into the water, so that she even started to drown because she didn't have time to catch her breath. Then one of the maids said that they were only to take care of her, and inquiring whether she was quite a girl already, continued to drown her. Soon she finally finished bathing and got dressed in a new outfit. The girl was very annoyed because she realized that they just wanted to drown her in that bathtub, and when they brushed her, they pulled out a whole bunch of her hair, and it was incredibly painful, and they pinched her while they were dressing her. Now she has bruises all over her body. She was also incredibly hungry, having not eaten for 2 days, and these maids are stealing her dowry right in front of her eyes. The girl realized that since she wasn't a cultivator, she would never be able to deal with these bullies who had rather advanced abilities. However, she tried to remain calm, because even if they weren't cultivators, she still wouldn't be able to deal with 3 already at once. Therefore, she would have to think of some other way. C.I. Lily walked up to them and said with a smile on her face that they had worked very hard to prepare her and this dowry for the wedding, so they could all just accept it as a gift for them, as if they were sisters. She also said that she didn't know the customs of their country, so she couldn't understand the depth of their care, and she was really sorry that she couldn't thank them properly. The maids at this point were very surprised and did not understand how she could call it caring at all. After all, they were really making fun of her. The princess, lowering her head, also said that someone like her, who couldn't develop spiritually, worse even than an ordinary person, didn't deserve to be the Dusky Emperor's soulmate at all. And to even think of such things was unforgivable to her towards His Majesty. Then the maid, revived, said that there was really nothing to talk about, for only the great saint was worthy of sharing life with His Majesty. The girl said that they were right, and she really thought so. Well, she herself was very surprised and didn't understand what saint could even be talked about. She decided not to argue with them. Then, with a smile on her face, she told all the maids that in fact she even admired them very much. One of the maids was very surprised and asked why she was suddenly saying that. Su Lily said that not only were her older sisters now outstanding cultivators, but their beauty was like a blossoming flower, and it was not inferior to the first beauties of the world. It's girls like them who should be wooing His Majesty. She's certainly not fit for it at all. Besides, with such a miserable mortal body that hadn't seen food for the past 2 days, she was about to starve to death. Then, smiling, she wondered if the 3 beautiful sisters could give her some food. The older maid, upon reflection, said that since she really knew and realized her place, she could follow them. The girl was immediately happy and thanked them for this wonderful opportunity. She didn't like to praise them like that, but she was willing to do a lot for food. They were soon outside, and the maid said that in their palace, not to mention the guards, even the servants are spiritual masters who don't need food at all. And if they do eat anything, it will be the most natural and pure spiritual food that needs no cooking. In the past, the palace kitchen was only used by the lower-class workers. However, it has been empty for many years, so I was told that the princess can use it. But before she does, she must clean the kitchen yard. The maid explained that no dry branches or weeds should be left behind, and the stone path must also be cleaned. The other maid also said that even if this kitchen was for the lower class, it wasn't something a princess could use. Her partner immediately laughed upon hearing this. After that, the girl threw a huge bag in her hands and said that these were the ingredients that had been prepared a few years ago. Once Su Lily looked inside, she saw a lot of spoiled and stinky food, and the maid told Her Highness that if she wanted, she could eat it. However, she would have to be careful not to accidentally die. Su Lily didn't reply anything to them, and the other maids laughed and said that she should work already. After all, she really wants to eat for sure. When the girl stepped aside, she immediately started raking all the leaves into one pile, and thought about how they were just 3 shameless lowlifes. If she had been more impulsive, she wouldn't have been able to take it anymore and would have said everything. But her biggest decision at the moment was to survive. She was so hungry that she even felt like her stomach was sticking to her stomach. If she didn't eat something right now, she would faint immediately. The girl continued to rake the leaves aside, and then suddenly she saw something very interesting behind them. When she ducked down, she saw that it was a steppe mushroom. The girl was incredibly happy that she had found it. However, she had not expected that these mushrooms could also be present in this world. But at that moment, one of the maids approached her and said that the sun was incredibly scorching, so they would go and rest in the shade for a while. And laughing, she also added that if the girl couldn't manage it in an hour, she could definitely forget in the kitchen. Sulili told them that she understood, and thought to herself that she had a great idea. She continued to hold a few freshly picked mushrooms in her hands. Some time had passed since then, and the maids came to check on her. They came closer to the girl and asked if she had finished her work. The princess herself in turn turned to them and told them that they had finally arrived, at which point she was roasting her mushrooms over a red-hot fire. The maid, when she saw this, got very angry and asked what she was even doing instead of working. Sulili explained that she found something incredible in this place. It's a stone for roasting meat, and everything looks quite appetizing. The maid irritably wondered if she thought she was just an idiot, and also asked what the thing even was, since she had never seen it before. Another maid replied that it looked very much like a low-level leafless root. Another agreed and replied that it was needed to treat diarrhea and had nothing to do with them practitioners. The girl, when she heard this, thought about it and realized that she didn't think it was, for it was quite different from the leafless root she had seen. This mushroom looked not only irresistible, however, we could even say appetizing, because it was roasted on this stone and smelled incredible. Sulili, flipping to the other side, said, "These are Tao vegetables. They are very easy to cook." The girl explained that to do this, you need to take a fresh mushroom and slice it thinly. Then place the slices on a clean roasting stone and fry slowly. And now, once the mushroom pieces are covered with a golden brown crust, you need to sprinkle them with a pinch of salt for flavor. And then the unique sweet smell of fresh mushrooms, combined with the aroma of burning wood, will immediately burst out and fill absolutely all the space. The maids at this moment also smelled that alluring fragrance, and they could directly feel it filling them. The smell really couldn't be described in words. However, she immediately wanted to taste the dish. At the same moment, the princess took a bite of the crispy mushroom, and as soon as she tasted it in her mouth, she couldn't help herself, and even shrieked in surprise. The girl smiled and said that it was unbelievably delicious. It was also so delicious because she hadn't eaten in many days. The maids, in turn, when they heard this, they thought about the fact that this fragrance was quite pleasant, but the girl quickly tried to push these thoughts away from her. After all, she is a practitioner and should absolutely not desire the food of ordinary mortals. The princess then came to her and asked her to try it soon. Because this food is cooked in her homeland, it is very healthy and delicious, so she just had to try it. The maids, when they saw this shiny golden mushroom, they just couldn't resist. Once she ate up, she couldn't believe it had such a rich flavor. Her nose, mouth, and even her breasts were all filled with this sweet flavor that she just couldn't get away from. The girl realized that she wanted to try some more. But then suddenly Sulili replied that unfortunately, that was it. And she would like to make something much better than fried mushrooms for her sisters. However, unfortunately, she didn't have any products. She said thoughtfully that if you could stew mushrooms with meat and fry it all over low heat, it would be much more flavorful. She explained that it was simply the unrivaled delicacy of her hometown. However, she was sorry that the sisters would never get to taste it. And so some time passed from that moment. The maids led the girl to some room that was completely clean. It turned out to be a summer kitchen. Sulili, when she saw all these things, was very surprised and said that they were really awesome because there were also many different foods and spices lying there. The girl said that she would never have thought they would be able to find so many different meats and seasonings. The maid smiled smugly and said it was no big deal. It wasn't that hard to do. Except for a few things they couldn't find, everything else was ready. Then the other maid came up to the older one and asked if they had not come to teach her a lesson. Kuxia explained that the kitchen is the place that the lowest class people use, and she is the princess who prepares their food, and it is quite humiliating. The girl, thinking about it, said that there was a point to it after all. Then she asked if the food was unpalatable, but the older maid said that she doubted the girl had the guts for it, so they could rest assured that everything would be fine. Then smiling, she also said that she had a great many more ways on her mind to get back at this girl. Several hours passed from that moment, and soon Su Lily finished cooking. She placed a huge bowl of food on the table. It was mushroom soup with meat, and she said that she apologized for making them wait. As soon as the maids saw it, they were amazed. Not only was the flavor incredible, but it looked beautiful. The girl explained that this is her specialty, so she asked the sisters to finally try it and give their opinion. Once the maids tasted it, they said the flavor of the mushrooms completely melded with the texture of the soup, and the stew was incredibly soft and just melted in your mouth. Combined with the broth, it's an explosion of different flavors. They said it was bliss and wondered if food could make people so happy. The eldest maid, who was the most against it all, said it was as if she had gone to heaven. This incredibly tender meat sauce coats her tongue and a feeling of warmth spreads throughout her body. The sweetness of the mushrooms is like a soul dance in the realm of immortals. There are so many dancing souls, and she straight up can't help herself and wants to dance along with them. At that moment, the maids, having finished their soup, suddenly began to dance. The girl thought that she had actually seen a spirit, but then suddenly she felt a sharp stabbing pain in her stomach, and immediately she was no fun. The princess stepped closer to her and looked at her in surprise, asking what she had happened, and then smiling wickedly, she wondered if it had tasted good. She explained that it was the spirit of the second princess who had cooked it for them. Su Lily, when she finally ate normally too, was very happy because she hadn't eaten anything in a long time. The maids, on the other hand, weren't having as much fun. She couldn't even remember the last time she had eaten to serve the princess. His Majesty the Emperor is the highest honor. In the clan, they all train hard for it. Previously, they had to eat even if they weren't hungry, because otherwise, they simply weren't worthy of serving the princess and His Majesty the Emperor. And the girl had to eat all kinds of herbs since childhood in order to increase her spiritual power. She tolerated even the disgusting taste in order to get well sooner. And compared to His Majesty the Emperor, she was looking forward to serving the princess and practiced hard. She tried her best to see Her Royal Highness as soon as possible. And so after all these years, she finally did successfully build the foundation and became a first-class palace maid. And they have a special spiritual food to take in order to get rid of the disgusting herbs they ate. Moreover, she finally had a chance to get to know Her Royal Highness, a figure she had admired since she was a child. At that moment, it was only a few steps away from her, and the girl just couldn't believe her happiness. Then the girl with pink hair turned to her and said that she had heard of her. She also added that she knows the hard work the girl has done for her, and the hardships she has endured. Her Royal Highness said that she was very touched by such diligence, and she needs to continue to work hard and donate even more to the temple. When Kun heard these words, she was very excited and told the princess that she would definitely be able to do it. But at that moment, she suddenly felt a strong blow on her cheek. After that, there was another bang, and after that a few more. And that's when she finally opened her eyes and realized what was happening. A second princess stood in front of her and held a small sack in her hands, asking what could lie in that tiny sack, and called them 3 beggars. She sighed heavily, and also added that it was not at all surprising that even their devotees had become worried. Su Lily said that she was really at a loss since she had spent so many valuable products on poison for the girl. Everyone was tied up together and their faces were messed up. The main one shouted, calling her various words, and asked how she even dared to poison their food. The maids also demanded an antidote. When the princess heard this, she laughed and asked how they could want such a thing as from poisonous mushrooms. There is no such thing as an antidote. Kun objected and said that it was all lies because she had eaten it too. so she doesn't ask to be given the antidote. The girl in turn smiled and replied that she had not eaten poisonous soup at all, but had used different mushrooms to make it. At this point, she showed 2 mushrooms, one poisoned and one perfectly normal. The maid got very angry and said that she was just nasty. Since she did that, Su Lily in turn leaned over to her and said that it was pretty mean, but she couldn't ruin her after all. She, smiling, also said that she was simply following the rule of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. After all, that's how it is for most people. However, she's actually a bit more cunning than the average person. The maid started yelling at her and calling her various very bad words. Then the girl just put a cloth in her mouth because she was quite noisy. After that, while walking out, she told the girl not to worry, because her body was well trained. So this toxin won't hurt him. Before leaving, she also winked and said that this mushroom, although poisonous, it definitely couldn't kill, but her stomach would famously ache inside her. Su Lily closed the door behind them and headed somewhere to the side, rejoicing in her triumph. Of course, she couldn't afford to provoke a monster like Emperor Yuan like this. However, she can definitely play with her 3 jangs. Before she can escape from the creator, she needs to return her own devotion. It was given by the former emperor's father, and can't just be left to Yuan for nothing like that. At that moment, she suddenly picked up a small purse. The maid saw that it contained spiritual food. She had heard that one bite of it would keep her feeling full for days, so she immediately began to eat it. But she quickly got the urge and immediately spit out that piece of stale bread, because it was very unpalatable. Hard, dry, and tasteless, as if you were just chewing on plastic. Su Lily, after thinking about it, realized that she should probably add some ingredients to it and cook it, but she decided not to worry about it too much. Therefore, she just went on her way. Some time had passed since then, and as she rounded the corner, she realized that she had just passed in this place before. The girl was very perturbed and realized that she had probably gotten lost somehow. And at that moment, a watch suddenly fell on her head. She immediately looked at it and didn't understand where in the world it could be from. But when she got closer, she saw a strange question on their dial. It said, "Does she want to go back to her home?" Su Lily was madly surprised when she saw it. But after that, the inscription changed, and it said that if she wanted to, she had to follow his instructions and look to the left. The girl immediately did so. Then another inscription appeared, saying that she would see a 1-story building there, the Devil Yuan Temple, and she needed to somehow infiltrate it. Su Lily still didn't know what was going on, and assumed that this watch could be a controller of her movement. It said that the girl needed to take the most important thing in the Jarth Temple, and also wished her good luck. Soon, she had actually approached the Yuan clan's sacrificial temple, the most sacred and most closely guarded place in the clan. And for thousands of years, this place had never been invaded by outsiders. So on this day, she decided to disturb the peace of the sacrificial temple after all. There was one of the clan's most sacred items, namely Miyuya's crown. It had always been the status symbol of the queen. On the day of His Majesty's great crowning, the emperor will personally put it on the princess, and she will ascend the throne and be provided with other gentlemen. His Majesty Emperor Yuan is the most powerful emperor of all dynasties, and the Holy Maiden is the closest woman to God in history. It was the sort of brother who is contracted in heaven, and the guy who was put just on this shift to protect this crown decided to risk his life, yet carefully protect this relic. However, at this moment, Su Lily came straight at him. She landed on the ground not far from him and asked where she had fallen to in the first place. The man was immediately frightened and shouted that she was an intruder. The girl noticed something hard under her foot. When she pulled it out, it was a sacred crown. The guy, seeing this, immediately ran at her and said that she must die. The girl turned to the side and saw that there were indeed guards in the place, and she thought it would be easy and unobstructed. And at this point, a few more people suddenly walked in, and one of them wondered if they were in cahoots. The girl and the guard immediately looked to the side and saw that it was the emperor along with his aides. Yuan stepped closer and said that it turned out that she had indeed tried to visit their clan's sacred artifact, and the second princess had really tried her best. Su Lily looked in his direction in surprise, not realizing herself how he had suddenly appeared at this very time. Frowning, he said that he didn't know yet what people were going to do with their sacred relic, but it was only a matter of time. So he asked that the girl stay put, after all. It would allow her to live a little longer. He in turn stepped closer to her and motioned for the second princess to finally explain what was going on here, and why she was holding their family heirloom. He also asked what the human race was up to. The man replied that an honest confession would ease her already difficult plight. Su Lily nervously began to smile and wondered what he was even talking about. How on earth could she hurt a prince as beautiful as him? But at that moment, she was able to dodge a blow just in time that nearly cut off a few hairs. The man looked at her and said that if she kept up all this nonsense, she would just die.